Hello, fellow travelers, and welcome to another episode of the Vertical Stars Podcast, third season. My loyal listeners, thank you for your continued support. It's an amazing episode because Darick Robertson boards the mothership to discuss Greaser Gemini Blues. Now, come on board as we go traversing the stars. Hi, Mr. Robertson. Thank you so much for the Vertical Stars Podcast.
Thank you for having me. Hi.
It's totally my pleasure. So, I always start off with a question of inspiration. So, inspire your love for comics and who your earliest influences.
My early influences?
Yes.
I guess the earliest I could count would be Warner Brothers, Looney Tunes, Charles Schultz, Peanuts,
Hmm.
and Disney. Those were probably my earliest. As far as comics go, I think the first comics I really got into were like the old Harvey comics and
Hmm.
Archie because that's what my sister liked. And I got everything downhill from her. She was older than me.
Yeah.
But the first real superhero stuff that stood out to me was like Ross Andrews Spider Man and Neil Adams on Batman and
Hmm.
Superman. That stuff.
I would say the Neil Adams that they really changed how comics were looked at. Oh, with Neil Adams Spider-Man. Where did you
Yeah,
buying comic books, especially with Batman, right before he took over and right after? Like, could you see that change in tone that suddenly happened with Batman?
I kind of was born into it as far as like when I first discovered comics. I was about 8 or 9 when I started getting really into superhero stuff. And I remember Neil Adams like Superman versus Muhammad Ali blowing my mind.
Hmm.
That would go on to have like a huge influence on Transmetropolitan and things like that because his backgrounds were so alive and his storytelling was so visceral and energetic that all of Neil Adams' work has always like left a heavy imprint on me in that regard.
And now, with you as an artist, if my memory serves, Greaser Gemini Blues is what your current project is. This is the first project that you're a writer on, not the artist, right? You're just
Yes,
really
this
doing
is this is one of. I mean, technically, it's the first original thing that I've written that I'm not drawing myself. I've just this last year. I think it's just about to come out or just came out. I wrote some graphic novels for the team of Crestar and the Night Stallion. You can look them up on YouTube. And it's like a movie property they're doing comics of, and it's I they hired me to as an art director. I ended up taking over and writing a lot of it for them. So I have been writing for other people, but this is the first original thing that I've written that I was going to draw myself, and then I chose not to. I decided to try something different, and at the time Stephen Jones, who's an old friend of mine, was kind of going through some stuff, and he needed a distraction project and wanted to get back into comics. And I was looking at this incredible drawing he had done of Snake Plissken, but he did it in this extreme animated style, but it's still really great. And I thought to myself, like, what if Greaser looked like that instead of the way I would do it? And he was totally into it, and it's been a lot of fun.
So, was it like to hand over the reins of art to somebody else? I mean, is there ever that thought of that's not how I would do it, or I mean, did you ever get that in your, or is it easy to just be like,
Constantly. I think I'm slightly driving him crazy because it's like I have to learn to let go and go. All right, I trust you, but it's like the truth of the matter is that he's an incredibly talented animator and he's worked in animation for the past 25 years on a lot of notable stuff under a lot of luminary animators, but he's kind of new to getting back into comics, and I have the opposite. I've been working in comics nonstop for the past 25 going on 30 plus years. And, so if I was getting into animation right now, I would kind of defer to his knowledge
yeah,
about what I should and shouldn't do. And I sort of want to do that with him for comics. Like, you're doing great, but like we had a conversation yesterday where he's having trouble getting up to speed on some of this, mostly because of circumstantial things like a million people that went to San Diego Comic Con got sick afterwards, and he was one of them. But I had to like, in order for him to get faster, I wanted to show him like, look, this page you just did has 9 panels and it's beautiful, but you don't need a background in every single panel. Like, look at these John Byrne pages that we both loved growing up. Another influence. And I said, look how perfectly John pulls it off with like 2 backgrounds a page
yeah.
and everything feels full and you always know where you're at. I go, that's the whole point of a background, is so you don't lose your reader. If there's something happening in the background, if the background is necessary to establish where your characters are, that's really the only time you need a background. But if like it's just two people talking, you can kind of leave it for just color at that point, and the word balloons are going to cover it all up anyway. So putting all this intense detail in every panel is not necessary. And of course, I'm a massive hypocrite. I did this book Oliver with Gary Whitta, and I was like filling up every background with intense detail. And of course, these were very dense pages. And then with Transmetropolitan, I went crazy. But I kind of learned over time when I had to move faster. This is how you move faster.
Now,
so I've been trying to guide him a little bit. I'm trying to be more like a big brother and a coach than it has to be this way, you know.
Does it help or assist in the letting go process the fact that his art is distinct from yours, so it doesn't quite feel like it's you trying to be like, no, I would put the tree like this.
No, I mean, I don't really tell him how to draw, but I do get involved in the storytelling, and that really is what is most important to me in all comics and whatever I'm doing. It's like I want the storytelling to be the most important thing, because it's not about drawing dynamic images for me. It's about communicating a tale. And Steven is so accomplished in his own right that, I mean, everything is amazingly consistent. Like he knows how to work on model and keep all the characters looking correct. And that's like a gift from animation. But for myself, it's like, you know, I even struggle with that in my own artwork. So I don't ever tell him how to draw. I just try to tweak him on the story. Like at one point in the issue we're working on, he had a character, they were established being next to a wide open garage door. And then, and I wrote in the script, okay, the sun's going down, and the main character speaking notices, hey, it's getting dark. And for whatever reason, he went over and drew the guy looking out of like a window with blinds. And I'm like, they're right next to a garage door that's wide open. I don't think he'd have to walk across and look out blinds to establish the sun is going down, you know.
Right.
But for whatever reason, that's where his head went. And I kind of had to go, one, you're creating a lot of extra work for yourself. And two, they're right next to an open door. You know?
So
but that's the kind of back and forth we mostly end up having, where I kind of come in as artist and go, have them looking out the door. It saves you a lot of time. It works more naturally.
So as the writer, are you writing full script? Are you writing kind of like Marvel, doing full script?
No, I'm actually very disciplined, I think would be the best word, as a writer. Like even if I'm writing for my own self to draw, I will write a full script for the editor to read as if somebody else was going to draw it. And I've learned that's always a good idea, because you never know when somebody else might have to. And so it saves you work in the future. If something goes upside down and another artist would have to come in, then the script is already there and I can remain as writer. But I wrote and drew Batman Legends of the Dark Knight recently for DC Comics, like about 2 years ago. And I was really excited to do that. But then, you know, I'm drawing my own script and I'm angry at myself. Like, what idiot put Batman on a boat in a rainstorm? You know, I could have had him in a dark cave somewhere, you know. But that was me. So writer me and artist me don't like each other very much.
I was just gonna ask, because I write indie comic books. Also, as the writer, I can't draw, so I just do the writing. So I do this, and I do full script. Now, I always wondered, as someone who's an artist like yourself,
yes,
having experience dealing with these writer scripts, what is it in a script that you get from writers yourself that you hate so much that as a writer you're not doing to your artists?
The biggest problem I have is when I work with a writer that doesn't really have a lot of experience with comics, and a lot of their experience comes from screenwriting or outside the genre. And you have to, I co-created a book with a couple of guys that had written their entire series as a big screenplay. And then it fell on me to break it into comics. And it was in the midst of it, I realized, oh, they have no idea about the real estate of comics. And the real estate of comics comes down to, like, if you're making a movie, you never have to worry about allowing enough room in the shot for a monologue. You know, you can just let the camera roll for 2-3 minutes and let the person talk, and you can maybe, you know, move the camera or change the angle. but you don't have to worry about creating room for dialogue. On a comic book page, you do. And so you have to be conservative with your with what'll fit on a page, and that can be very challenging, especially if you have a lot to discuss or explain to the audience. But on top of that, then they would have things like, okay, there's 50 people on a cliff ready to attack, but but then they've got the little details written on their foreheads and things in their hands, and I'm like, okay, each of these people, if I'm going to have 50 people, are going to be about a centimeter tall on the actual page. So details on their forehead, that's not going to be a possibility. You have to pick one or the other. And a lot of times people will write in the scripts like two people are having a conversation, but then somehow you're supposed to be able to see everything they're both doing. It's like somebody's back's going to be to the camera. So you have to think about that and cut, So I have to do a lot of sometimes editing on scripts that I'm already reading if they don't know the genre. The best people are the ones that do and kind of leave those gaps out of their writing.
Now, I've heard different things from artists, so let me know if this is accurate. Artists get pissed off when you have in a script like two actions, like he jumps and he's also doing this with his other. It's like, well, what are the
bingo. Yeah, because it's like I remember reading the thing where a guy like Peter Parker comes in and answers the phone, sits down and takes a bite of an apple. Okay, pick one. He enters the room, he bites an apple, or he sits down, or he answers the phone. You don't get to choose all of those. Otherwise, it's going to be a really awkward looking panel of Peter doing these four things at once, which, he doesn't need to. You just, what's the most important thing? Is the apple important, or is that a detail? If answering the phone is most important, just cut to Peter on the phone.
No, having once again now doing scripting, is there also a empathy for other writers who are like, oh, okay, I got to put myself doing that to myself now. I can see why they do this thing to piss me off every time.
I realized so much as I'm working, and like I'm becoming the writer that I don't like, like I'm the writer that's telling my artist, don't do that, do this. So yeah, it's I'm very empathetic. I've had the good luck of getting along with, most of the writers I've worked with. We remain friends and like working together. But every once in a while, like I'll want to do my own thing and it'll cause friction.
One thing I do love with that you did with Greaser's Gemini Blues, especially at the very beginning, you had that connection to music. You have Tom Petty mentioned. You have, I think it was U2 is mentioned as well. So can you give me the connection between Greaser, Gemini Blue, and that music?
Well, I mean, that's music I love, and I'm an amateur musician. When I'm not drawing comics, I'm learning music and playing the guitar and singing and stuff. And I grew up with music, so music is very, very important to me. And when I like to say, when art became my job, then music became my art. Like I have to draw every day. I don't have to play music every day, so it's always a treat. And when I do play music, it puts my head in a better place. That particular music is just what I love. Also, I love the idea that Radio Pete is a major character in this, and he is kind of Buddy's father figure. But when the Gemini came to Earth, we haven't really covered this yet, but when the Gemini came to Earth, their arrival caused a major disruption in the magnetic field around the Earth, and as a result, like for a while, like things went black, and it caused chaos, and a lot of the streaming and things like that were lost. And when they rebuilt under the new, I'm getting too into the weeds because this is how my brain works. Basically, like all you have now is the old ways, and the old ways are radio. And because there are no digital files to choose from anymore in Buddy's world, they're too poor for that kind of technology, and a lot of it was lost. Like all they have is just doing radio the old-fashioned way. So there's Radio Pete playing his grandfather's records, So if you don't like, and he even says that on the first opening, like if you don't like my grandfather's flavor of licorice pizza, you're out of luck, but you can't beat the price, And so I figured it's 100 years in our future, he'd be playing stuff from kind of right now. His grandfather would be Radio Pete's grandfather would be our age.
Now, am I pronouncing the character right? Stanek? Is it Stanek?
Stanek, yeah.
Stanek. He suggests to one of the other characters that the humans destroyed the planet prior to the Gemini arriving. Is that
yes?
So what did we do? And how did
Look out the window. It's happening now. No. Basically, what I liked, my whole thing with the Gemini is that they have been coming to the Earth for generations. Like I like to borrow from a lot of existing UFO folklore as the foundation for why this has all happened. And a lot of the UFO folklore is based in the idea that not only have we been visited by aliens for centuries, that they are preparing to come cohabitate. Now, I don't like, they're not here to invade. They're here to like be a part of things. That's the, like, a lot of the folklore. They're going to bring good stuff, and everything's going to get better once we accept that they're there. Blah blah blah. I'm kind of treating it like an allegory on colonization, and that, once upon a time in the United States, when it was just a country, just a continent, the Native Americans woke up one morning and they were getting their fire ready, and they're getting their water from the river, and they're doing their hunting. And one of them went out to the shore and went, "What's that?" And it was the Mayflower about to land, and nothing would ever be the same again. But they didn't know that. They just thought, "Hey, that's weird." And then when the weird people showed up, they tried to make peace with them. They helped them through a winter that they wouldn't have survived if they weren't there, and if they didn't cooperate. And so the Native Americans quietly started to trade with them, and then they started making treaties like, "Okay, well, if you don't come to this part of our land, we'll let you live." And all that was fine until, like, Andrew Jackson and the Trail of Tears, and now they live on reservations, and we have it all. And it's not ideal for the Native Americans who tried to be friendly and get along. Well, I'm kind of flipping the script there, and the Gemini are the pilgrims. And so we are slowly but surely, within the course of this story, you'll see it happen, selling ourselves out to them, and we don't know it. And so it's that's sort of the underlying story of what Buddy ends up coming up against, and where it will go if we get to continue beyond 4 issues.
So so they kind of had an insidious kindness, as it were, the Gemini.
Yeah, I mean, it's not like the Stanek, which you brought up. Like, Stanek can't stand humans. He's something of a speciesist. Like, what his daughter has grown up on Earth, and so she feels very differently about Buddy and the rest of them than her father does. Like, her father is very, Geminis must stay pure. There are laws in this world on both sides of the species, where the humans, they're kind of side eye with Gemini, and the Gemini are like, we just interact when we have to, but the idea of them breeding or falling in love is absolutely forbidden and completely out of the question. So Buddy and Kira, who are our main two protagonists, like, their romance, their love is forbidden. So it's a little bit of a Romeo and Juliet story, and that's kind of the heart of the whole thing.
Is Stanek a hypocrite, because he is relying on humans to fix the ships?
Oh, to work with them. He's a massive. Yeah, Buddy calls him on it. You'll actually see it on full, but Buddy even calls him on it in the first issue, where he is kind of saying like, "Oh yeah, sure, you need us to fix your ships, but then you don't want anything to do with us." So it's a a little bit of a caste system as well. My dad was a mechanic, and that was his livelihood for 30 years. So Buddy is inspired by my father. And, like, I still to this day like to work with real materials, because if I don't have dirty hands at the end of the day, I don't feel like I really worked. And that comes a lot from my dad, who was always under a car, always fixing something for somebody. And he really had a gift for it. So, like, that's sort of where Buddy comes from. But Stanek, yeah, he would prefer it if they all could take care of their own shit and not have to deal with the humans at all. But unfortunately, the humans are like this pest to him. Like, he, kind of the way the early West was with Native Americans that were still hanging around.
Does Stanek realize he's a hypocrite then? If he
No, he's too arrogant.
Okay. And the other thing that's kind of interesting is that, as you said, the Gemini, they come down, they have all that technology. Humans apparently understand it enough to now repair the ships.
Yeah,
what level of technology do to our society and culture now that we have access to what they have?
Well, we've become dependent on it, and in a lot of ways, it's slowed down a lot of the natural stuff that would have gone into apocalyptic even further. Like we wouldn't be able to run these biodomes and things like that. And if you live under the biodomes, on Earth, because there's other places where this has been effective, but there's a reason I'm setting the story in Nevada for the first story is, the Gemini can't just go where they want to go, and they can't leave Earth at this point. But that's not really a spoiler, but that's something that's going to unfold later. My stomach has decided to interrupt. So there's a reason for everything. I can only tell so much in one issue, and I can only go through so much in 4. But I'm really hopeful that I get to keep telling the story, because I have a very clear idea of where things will need to go and what we're going to reveal as it does, and that there are more than one kind of alien already here on Earth. Some of them work for the Gemini, and that's going to unfold as the story progresses. But like I said, I like to pull from existing folklore, and the original idea for the Gemini was based on these aliens that I think are called Nordic. You can look them up. They're on Wikipedia. I'm trying to remember if they're called the Nordic aliens. I think that's right. But anyways, they were aliens that apparently are hybrid alien humans, and they look like real tall Nordic people with big, bright blue eyes and perfect skin. And they're just larger and a little awkward than your average human. And people have claimed to have interacted with them and found out that they're benevolent. And so it was the idea that it was these people originally. And then as I got more into the reality of creating this story, I like the idea more of them being, unashamedly alien, that these other Nordic aliens would have been early scout crews that would have had to blend in more. But the idea was that they were preparing the Earth since all the way back to the Garden of Eden, which will be another story, which that was the first biodome in my story. But like all that will become clear, that they thought when they got to Earth and they finally made the big move, it would be like the paradise that they had left pre-industrial revolution. They've been gone a while. It takes a long time to go from where they are to here, or to Earth. And in the time that they were preparing, they thought that everything would show up and it would be like it was when they saw it last. And of course, the water is polluted, and in 100 years in the future, it's even worse. But the water's polluted, and the nuclear waste into the ocean from Chernobyl and Fukushima. All the different things that are slowly eroding our natural world will be even worse 100 years from now. And then that's the world that the Gemini basically have arrived into, 50 plus years. They've been on Earth about 50, 60 years. Like, we're really used to them. Nobody freaked, because I remember my editor, his first reaction was, how come nobody's reacted to these aliens showing up in the yard? Shouldn't they be like, wow, an alien? I'm like, no, it's like your neighbor coming over. Like, they're just used to them at this point. They just annoy each other.
I mean, I really do love the concept.
Aliens are old news.
I love the concept with Greaser. The interesting was that you kind of have this sort of Mad Max kind of environment, where Buddy and his grandmother live. Now, it's a very harsh world. You have these bikers that basically, in the very beginning, kind of forcing them to try to make them food and stuff. In this harsh world, what is Buddy and his grandmother doing that allows them to survive? Because it can't just be they're being nice. There's got to be something else going on that allows them to.
Well, they're running. I mean, technically, they're running a business, and the idea is that it's not. For my inspiration in the opening, it wasn't so much Mad Max. It's not complete anarchy out in the world. It's just more like the Old West, where I think about, I watch movies like High Plains Drifter and stuff like that, where like a bunch of banditos or the Magnificent Seven, where if a bunch of banditos decided to roll into town, they just take over the place because there's no one there to defend them. And the townspeople have to kind of rely on their own or succumb, and that's kind of where Buddy and his grandma were. Except grandma's pretty smart, and Buddy is too. But they let them. I had no spoilers, but they let them kind of create their own problem and solves it on their own. That's actually was inspired by a real thing that Dr. Robert Sapolsky, who studied baboons and alpha males, and that's actually what inspired the entire series. Was this documentary about baboons. I know it's kind of a weird connection, but that's actually what the whole first scene was inspired by, this documentary about baboons that insisted on eating tainted meat. But it's so they survive by their wits. But I mean, technically, Stanek is the sheriff of the area. But the only thing Stanek is the sheriff is the Gemini is like really all he cares about is anything that you're doing going to affect what we're doing. And I guess like, or they don't want anybody coming through with like a rocket launcher and firing at the Gemini ships, so they'll protect that area. And then the land between like some of the more protected areas with boundaries that the Gemini take care of is kind of no man's land. And then that's where you get the racers, and the racers are these like Bedouin kind of people that live between the like the 80 miles it takes to get from where Buddy is to the domes of Old Vegas, where it's safe and you have to kind of get in with ID, and it's very patrolled and carefully protected. That no man's land is when you're really in trouble, because racers will chase your car down, drive you off the road, take everything you have, and cannibalize you. So that part is a little more Mad Max than what Buddy and his grandma have to deal with. But Buddy dreams of the day he's working on his car, which is he calls Badass Betty, and it's made up of like all these harvested parts that he's found from abandoned vehicles. And but his dream is that he can drive a car all the way from his place to Old Vegas and back without having to stop to siphon fuel or get a part to replace anything. He wants to kind of and it has all these like kind of like James Bond like homemade gizmos to protect it. So,
and I think, as you mentioned, the Romeo and Juliet aspect with Buddy and Tekka.
No, don't call her Tekka.
Okay.
Her name's Kira. Tekka's like Tekka's very derogatory. Okay. That's one of the most like she says it constantly. Like, he calls me a Tekka. Don't call me Tekka. Okay. But I'm having a really good time with it because I'm making up my own. Because I figure it's 100 years from now, and you think about 100 years in our past. From today, and like how many people say nincompoop, and once upon a time saying rascal was actually a real big insult. So like the language just evolves, and think about even in the last 2 decades of your own life how much slang has come and gone that it sounds dated to say it now. Or if somebody says something and you're like, what does that mean? And I have to look it up on Urban Dictionary. Like, I think the most recent thing was like, oh, she's a brat. And I'm like, well, I know what a brat used to be, but clearly it's a good thing now,
I know. I teach 8th grade, and the word.
So you understand.
Now, I don't even understand. So they'll say something. I'm just like, I honestly know what you're talking about. I really don't.
Yeah. Welcome to being old. I have kids. I have adult children now, and they somewhat keep me fresh. I remember when fresh was a cool thing to say. Anyway, but it's really fun. So like in my world, I'm actually, and I figured when you got 2 languages, like an alien language and English, and both have learned to speak, that a lot of that Gemini slang would slip into the culture. So Tekka, Chaka, there's a bunch of stuff that they'll say. Chugga is a real big insult. You call somebody a chugga, it's fighting words, but so I'm having a lot of fun creating this little like this language that I think in context we'll read, but at the same time, like I don't even know what it means. I just know it. I just know that Kira really hates it if you call her that.
That's awesome.
But I think it's kind of like calling her baby or chick or something like that.
I like how much thought you've gone into like the layers of the culture you've created.
No, it just lives in my head. I'm like I have a hard time like pulling it together enough to just show you one story. It's like I want to tell everybody everything and create a glossary, and I'd go crazy like that if I could, but luckily I have good people around me that don't let me go too crazy.
Will there ever be a Gemini glossary at the back of a comic book?
I hope. You know what? I think at some point, especially if we get to a trade paperback or a couple of arcs, I would definitely be interested in sitting down and writing a glossary. I think that would be really fun. I used to love that. I love that in the old days. Like there would always be like glossaries or maps. Like I love with the world of Conan the Barbarian that there's a whole map of Hyperia that you can study. I had to learn it when I wrote Conan back in 2009 for a brief minute and wrote and drew Conan myself. I was able to go in and like learn about Hyboria, and I'm like, okay, well, I guess my story is happening over here. But for me, like when I went into it, I thought, okay, fantasy world. It's like, he goes where I say he goes, But no, this is lore. You have to know the lore, kind of like Tolkien as well. So, I mean, I don't have any dreams of grandeur or disillusion that my greaser world will ever become quite as expansive, but in the outside chance that I got that opportunity, having a glossary would be a lot of fun. There is a whole thing going on with like, there is no United States of America anymore in my story. Like that has collapsed a long time ago. So now it's just like each state is their own fiefdom again. And there's a governor's alliance. So there is no president. So the governor of each state is kind of the most powerful president of their state. And the states are now, you have a very different experience driving across the United States in Buddy's life, in Buddy's world 100 years from now than you would today. But it's sort of like when the USSR broke up.
So I think they also, especially when you get the map going, when you add the map to the trade paperback, and you're gonna have your fans being like, "Excuse me, you said this happened over here, but your map clearly shows that that's not where
That's my worst nightmare, because I mean, literally, there's only so much room that I can pull from my ass to put out into a story that I'm making up in my drug-addled brain. It's not drug-addled.
You're gonna have some fans too, like, especially with the glossary too. Like,
but I would love that. That would, like, nothing would make me happier than somebody calling me on my own shit. Like, are you that into it? Oh, I'm so touched.
You don't be able to, if it goes long enough, you're gonna have some fan, especially with like the glossary with the grammar. Goes, excuse me, if the word is this, then grammatically the other word can't be that because the grammar is clearly this.
Well, I mean, I have a Gemini greeting that they say to each other, which is Chikara, which basically means everybody's at peace. We're all good here. So somebody, if a Gemini walked into the room and he went, Chikara, human, that just means, hey, I come in peace. We're all good. How's it going? It's sort of all encompassing greeting, like you don't have to be alarmed, Chikara. But I actually ended up spelling it wrong the second time I used it in script number 2. I was reading through and I'm like, oh no, I spelled Chikara totally different in the last issue. I had to go back and swear I would need my own glossary just to make sure I'm spelling my own bullshit words correctly.
You don't know. I mean, the bullshit could be dialect, right? Slightly different.
Yeah, well, it is.
You know how that works.
Yeah, exactly. I mean, it is dialect, but at the same time, I'm like, maybe I should like write it down for my own self rather than hoping the fans will correct it for me.
So, with Kara and Buddy, obviously her Stanek the father is not going to be happy with this relationship. That's obviously blooming.
Oh no, no, that's a major part of this first arc.
So how bad is it going to get for Buddy if he keeps pursuing Kara the way he is?
Well, I mean, nothing's going to stop him. He ends up, by the end of the first arc, it becomes very dire. They end up in very dire circumstances together, and their first real moment together is under the worst circumstances possible. Not unlike Leia and Han finally saying "I love you" right as he's being descended into the carbonite. I love you. I know. Like that's the worst possible timing for this conversation. So it's a little bit like that for Buddy and Kira, but I don't want to spoil anything.
Well, it becomes much safer for her now that she thinks Han Solo is about to die, right? She's like, if I get her out there now, what is he going to do? No impact.
I think Leia holds out hope, but don't get me into this because I'm a massive Star Wars nerd. I will argue the early trilogy like forever and get into the minutia. Oh. But yeah, I think Leia's holding out hope. I think Han's a little more pessimistic, which is why it's like, I'll save this for later.
Well, back in the 90s, I used to buy the novels. So I was a Star Wars nerd back in the day, and I used to buy all the Kevin Anderson novels, all of them. I used to buy every single one of them. Timothy Zahn was fantastic.
Yeah, I love Timothy Zahn. I'm actually catching up on those on audiobook finally because I bought them all back in the day and then not had any time to read them. But on road trips, man, I love them.
Well, I will say
the audiobooks,
the what they call now, I guess, the EU books back in the day are to me better than what ever came out after. Those books were absolute genius.
I can't speak to them, but I do. One of the things that I remember early on that really blew my mind was the Star Wars radio dramas they did back in
Hmm.
the late '70s and early '80s, and they did all the original trilogy, and they got a lot of the original actors to come in and do the voices. Have you ever heard those?
I know of them. I've never seen them. I've
Oh,
heard.
they're phenomenal. I think you can find them on YouTube, but I have a full CD set of them, and I listened to them all. But one of the coolest things was how much deeper they would go into the story than they could in the movie.
Hmm.
And if you were just a kid like me, who you had the movie and maybe a novel. I think the first novel I remember was Splinter of the Mind's Eye, and it was like, Luke and Leia were still hot for each other at that point. So and had this great Ralph McQuarrie cover, but the CDs, the radio drama, like the in the first episode, you get a whole lot of backstory about why Princess Leia is going to go on this mission to Alderaan, and why why she is in charge of that ship rather than like her father. There's a whole bunch of like that, and there's this guy she's supposed to marry, and I'm like, this is fantastic. And then like when they got to Empire Strikes Back, there's like a whole conversation Luke and Han have in that tent when they're waiting to be found after he rescues them from the Wampa. And that, like between the scene of where he gets the tent set up and then the snow speeders find him in the morning, there's a whole scene where they're like, he's helping him get warm and trying to help him recover. And they have a whole conversation about what he's seen and his vision with Obi-Wan. And I'm like, more.
Well,
Like I love that kind of minutia. I love getting into the gritty with what the characters are motivated by or what they're
hmm.
thinking.
I mean, like I said, I found them brilliant. I mean, I used to buy the Dark Empire comic books as well. They had some great stuff. They had some great stuff in the '90s. I do miss that Disney said they don't count as anything anymore. I was like, ah, they're so good.
Ah, I was busy drawing comics, so I didn't have much time for reading if it wasn't my scripts that I had to illustrate. But I love that world though still very much. And like like I said, if you my world my right over here you can't see it, but there's a Millennium Falcon hanging from my ceiling. So
Oh, that's
you
awesome.
know
That is truly
I love
awesome.
it that much.
In the ideal
Uh,
world
you can
for
kind of if I think I could pull the illusion, but like if I can break the fuzz, maybe that's like an R2D2 trash can right there.
oh man, that is
See, I
awesome.
wait. Can I break
Yeah,
it? You
actually, I
can
can
kind of
see it.
see.
When you move your
Yeah,
hand
there's
around, there's like this
R2.
big reveal.
Yeah, there's R2.
That's
So
awesome.
yeah,
So,
I'm big into it.
so in the ideal world of Gemini, Greaser's Gemini Blue, how many issues is this? It's going to go for like a saga like Star Wars, where you have saga
I
after
could keep.
saga.
I mean, at this point, I only have a good idea of what I want the next arc to be and where things are going to pick up after this four issues ends. But it's sort of like it's kind of like dating a hot girl in that I'm happy she went out with me once. I'm not going to make any wedding plans, because I don't know if anybody's going to read this first arc and if people are going to stick with it through the first four issues. Magma's a small company and they're just getting going. And so I
Hmm.
don't want to get my hopes up and then feel disappointed. So I'm trying to just focus on what I have right now. I'm about to write issue 4 and then that'll wrap it up and leave it in a good place for more story. And I know what I want to do. But whether or not we get a green light for another 4 issues is still very much up in the air. So
Well, I hope so because the first issue that I've read so far is a very smart comic book. I really enjoyed it, and
thank you very
hopefully,
much.
when Greaser Gemini Blue become arc and then eventually a movie and TV series because obviously we're moving that direction as well.
I hope so.
We get to keep building, and I do now expect a glossary and a token level map at the back of the
Well,
next issue.
that's a dream. I will say Magma's been extremely supportive. They're definitely committed to the first 4 issues. There's no fear that we're not going to get to finish at least this first trade paperback, and hopefully maybe by issue 4 it'll catch on. And I'm grateful that people are entertaining me as a writer. Really appreciate that you liked it. It's and I've been doing variant covers for the issues. So if you were curious about what it would look like if I had drawn it, you'll get at least 4 samples of me drawing all the characters and some of the scenes because that's what I've been focusing in on. Like the issue 2 is you'd see it would be darker, more like body horror, where Steven brings this like sweetness to the whole thing that I'm just not capable of. Uh, but I love it. I love the world, and I think in some way or another it will live on. Just whether or not it will stay on with magma, or we reinvent it somewhere else. But at this point, I'm really hopeful that we're going to get to keep going, and that it's and I'm really hopeful people get into it.
Well, I do too. Mr. Robertson, it's an absolute honor to speak with you, sir. Thank you so much. And I want my
Hey, my
listeners
pleasure. Thank you.
pick up Greasers, Gemini Blue when they can. And only saying,
Yeah,
thank you
the,
so much.
each arc will have a different subtitle, kind of like Star Wars: The Empire Strikes Back, Star Wars: The Return of the Jedi, et cetera, et cetera. So the next one will have a different subtitle. Gemini Blues is just the first arc,
Okay.
and yeah. And I'm building up a larger world that I will expand into. If I get to do the next arc will be a lot more action packed. It should be a lot more interesting than because in the first one I'm setting a lot of the world up, but it's also the idea that if you like if you thought the whole story of Star Wars was Luke and his aunt and uncle on the moisture farm and what that's like, you were going to be sorely disappointed because he's not there for very long. That's kind of what happens in Greaser, where we start out at the diner, but that's not the whole world.
And and like I said, when you're ready to come out with the TV series, and you can come right on back, and all the other fun parts, like I said, the glossary, the maps, what other little like Star Wars like additions you can add to Greasers that we're missing. But the timeline, you got to put in your timeline as well. That's just always
Yeah, I can't. Well, I have a backstory that I want to write about. Like the only thing I've been talking to Magma about maybe doing is writing and drawing this prequel, which would be about Radio Pete and Grandma when they were young, and when the Gemini first arrived, and what that was like, and what the collapse of the United States was like, and sort of like a whole other adventure story. How Pete lost his leg, and it's and why Buddy's parents aren't around. It's all up here. I just hope I get to tell these stories.
well, I do like to, sir. It was an absolute honor. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much. It was a pleasure talking to you, Jeff.
You too. Thanks for listening to another episode of the Verta Stars podcast. Please like and subscribe. Turn for the next episode when Erik Larsen boards the mothership to discuss the Savage Dragon from Image Comics. To next voyage, travel on.